Well, you know what? I've been told it's Friday. The weekend is starting. So what else is there to do in the weekend other than reading Blizzard hotfixes for this game? Of course, nothing else. Now, most of the hotfixes are Blizzard's continuous quests in trying to put down the spell rebellion against the invisibility potion, which kept breaking over and over for multiple classes based on certain abilities, and this is more of it. Measured Contemplation legendary for Priest, Insanity Generation, breaking the potion for Shadow Priests, Inevitable Demise, Soulish and Demon Skin talents for Warlock, they were all breaking Invisibility Potion, and the search continues by Blizzard. But there are a couple of interesting fixes, though. The number one is related to Gore Chop. Now, this is going to be a roller coaster because first, many of you will learn of an amazing quality of life change for this boss, only to then be told that this quality of life change has just been fixed. So yeah, you're gonna get a little bit of a bittersweet taste from this fix because an issue has just been fixed on Gore Chop. The issue caused players at range to not always be pulled in before Tenderizing Smash. So what happened on this boss is that you were getting pulled in on the boss because you were, well, targeting the boss. And the boss was pulling you to him. What happened is that if you were targeting yourself, not the boss, anyways, you were not getting pulled in to the boss. So, particularly helpful during storming weeks, you could simply just wait for Gore Chop to start charging up this ability and then just target yourself and just completely ignore the part where you get pulled in. Now this, as I mentioned, is a pretty helpful quality of life addition. You are now going to have an easier time fighting this boss. Unfortunately, you won't, because actually this has gotten fixed. This was considered an issue, not how the boss was supposed to play out, so now we are back to the old days. Now, the best way for you to handle Gore Chop, if you weren't already using this system, this strategy, is to simply stay close enough. Not so close that you're in melee range, not so close that you even get to deal with storming, but close enough that you can see, you can see where storming is, and when you get pulled in, you're not gonna get in the same line, in the same straight line that storming is traveling to, so you get knocked up, and then Gore Chop does his smash and you die. So you have to go back to the normal way of dealing with Gore Chop after this fix. There's another fix. This is about Valor Points. So the fix for Valor Points is that they are now awarded immediately upon completing a Mythic Keystone dungeon, instead of looted from the chest. At first glance, you might be saying, well, who cares, right? Like, what's the difference? What does it matter? It matters for a couple of reasons. Number one, we have the innocent reason, we have the naive reason, which is you might actually just forget that there is something useful in the chest. Particularly after you have completed a key, you are left behind, you are maybe resting someone, maybe you're not paying attention, and you see people already sprinting to the chest, spamming the right-click button until they're out of combat, and they just loot a couple of items. You know that there aren't any more items than 2 that you're gonna get from your keep, so once you see that 2 people already have the loot available from the cache, you just forget to click it. You know the anima is gonna be sent in your mailbox anyways, so you're like, whatever, I'm just leaving. So for the innocent side, this is also gonna help you a little bit. Now there are other sides to this though. Number one, there was possible griefing available with this system, because with this system, what happens if you are about to finish a key and someone kicks you from the group? What happens is that if you get kicked, you cannot loot the chest. Well, again, it's not that big of a deal because you're gonna get your stuff in the mail. It might have happened to you, for example, that sometimes you disconnected, at the end of the chest, at the end of the run. Maybe sometimes you left the group yourself or someone kicked you actually before the end of the run, but the run was able to be completed anyways. Maybe it was even a heroic dungeon or a Mythic 0 dungeon. You still got your stuff in the mail, right? But here's the problem, Valor Points cannot be sent via mail. Actually, you won't be getting Valor in your mailbox, so you have to find a different solution. So Blizzard found a solution to just give you automatically, instantly, Valor Points the moment you complete the key. And in case you were wondering, yeah, well, but why don't they just let us get the Valor Points in the mail? Well, Valor Point in the mail, again, is possibly subject to abuse again. For example, what happens if you reach the Valor Point cap and then you just continue doing Mythic Plus keys and refuse to loot the chest? You're gonna get your items, if you loot any, in the mail. You're gonna get your Valor Points if you loot any in the mail. The mails last for 30 days, so you can just stockpile your Valor Points in the mail, bypassing effectively the cap. So it could also leave some room up for exploiting. So they just made it to try to prevent as many different angles of attack from abusing and exploiting the system. Then we have to talk about the main change of the week, the main addition, actually, not the change, the addition of the week. Now, let me preface this by saying that my level of fact given doesn't actually enter in your screen because it's so low, I can't even put it in. It's something that literally doesn't affect me in any way, but I feel like I should report it because people will find a way to complain and argue about this as well. So, here is the message. Here is the message from the Chosen One. Torghast rankings are open. The default metric is speed, but DPS, HPS, and execution are also supported. Only layer 8 is ranked. It is broken up by size, so you can earn independent ranks for solo up to 5 men, as well as the 18 floors of Twisted Corridors. Now, this is the message of Kira. Kira is the owner, creator, and manager of Warcraftlogs. So yeah, in short, Warcraftlogs now has a dedicated part for Torghast rankings. Again, that's why I literally care nothing about this. I don't think it is in any way a bad addition to the game. But of course, we already have the Doomsayers pointing out that this is going to somehow turn Torghast into some sort of eliting grounds where you're going to find meta being shaped in Torghast and things like that, when of course it's not going to be like this. Number one, Torghast can still be done and is still done by the majority of the population solo, which means it doesn't matter at all who is good. You're not a survival hunter trying to do the KSM of Torghast and you're not getting invited because you can just do it solo by yourself. Number two, most of these things are going to apply to speedrunners, and I can guarantee you 99% of the population doesn't do anything related to speedrunning when it comes to Torghast, so it's not really going to affect you either. It is just another way to put some competitiveness in a PvE environment, which might, it doesn't mean it will, but it might give some mileage to the activity. Maybe some people couldn't care less about Torghast, they see this change and they still couldn't care less about Torghast, so nothing has changed negatively. Maybe some people couldn't care less about Torghast and then they see this change and they think, let me see how fast I can be myself to see how I would rank. After all, Torghast was a casual activity. It's not that it was ranked. It's not that after I finished my layer 8, one-shotting everything, thinking I was super powerful, I didn't know exactly how powerful I was, how fast I went, how strong I was compared to other, I don't know, demonology warlocks. Now you can, if you want to. You can log yourself like you would log a raid boss and then just upload it. So I don't think many negative things can happen because of this. Then, for the rest of the week, we have to talk for a second or two about the current week we have in Mythic Plus, which is Spiteful, Grievous, and Fortified. Now, this is a particularly nasty week for healers. Overall, all things considered, it's not too bad of a week, as I pointed out before. It's not the worst of the Fortified weeks. It is also not even the worst of the Grievous weeks or the Spiteful weeks. So, like, altogether, it's not that bad. It is roughly on the same level of difficulty as last week with Tyrannical. However, it is amongst the more annoying for healers. It's never going to be as bad, particularly because, as I taught you, as I trained you, none of these affixes are particularly heavy time wasters, so you still have the options to go relatively fast if you are coordinated enough, if you are good enough with your party synergy, because Grievous, however much damage it might do, it is still not going to slow you down too much, and Spiteful, it can slow you down a little bit if you don't CC the ghosts correctly, but still, it is not necrotic, it is not bolstering, it is not even sanguine, which might still make you lose time if you don't play it properly, so you can still go rather fast with these affixes. They're just very annoying for healers, and when we talk about healers, we are talking with a particular focus on Discipline Priest and Restoration Druid. This affix, Grievous, does not fit and match very well with the way Resto Druids and Discipline Priests heal, right? Resto Druids do so with Hots. Hots don't work very well with Grievous. Druids typically don't top players out. They shower them in Hots, keeping them more or less at the same HP, or slowly making them go back to the top, but not really full, not really very heavy hitting abilities that can top you. It is often very mana inefficient, very bad for a Resto Druid, having to hard spam single target heals to top players, which is something Grievous is going to push you to do. And same goes for Discipline. A lot of the rotation, the cycle of heals that Discipline Priest pull off is based on absorbs, on preventing the damage. So after a big phase of damage done has happened, the priest has absorbed most of it, and the party is now at 60 to 70% HP, with 2 to 3 Grievous stacks. That's a problem for a Discipline Priest because they don't have the same toolkit to deal with this scenario. That's when they have to go into spamming Shadowmend, which is not only not very good, but is also going to drain you of a lot of your mana. To make this even worse for healers, Spiteful is particularly annoying because many people, most of you, most of me, have learned that when a Spiteful spawns, you just, leave him behind and keep going, right? You just killed 3 mobs, look how good you were, you killed all 3 of them at the same time, why worry? Throw down a binding shot and run to the next pack, right? It's not a big deal. Well, this becomes a problem this week, because now there is Grievous. The healers had to spend more mana than they usually would have because there is more damage to heal. So it means they will go out of mana more quickly, they will need to drink more often, and guess what happens? There is a Spiteful spawning, keeping you in combat. So the party is going to do the exact same thing they do usually. They will spawn the Spitefuls, the last few Spitefuls of the pack, and then they just leave for the next pack, except the healer is now at 20% mana and would have used this time to run from one pack to the next to drink, and now they can't because they are still in combat because of the Spiteful. And this type of interaction is also going to be a big culprit for the lack of mana regeneration of healers during this week. Prideful is also very nasty this week with Grievous. Prideful already has several problems for keys, especially the higher you go. Number one, DPSers don't really want to use a DPS cooldown on Prideful. There is this idea that Prideful is useful so that you can then stack all your cooldowns with Prideful on the next pack or on the next boss. And this is almost turning Prideful into a bait more than anything, where it's the healer. It's the healer who has to dump multiple cooldowns just to stay alive because none of his DPS are willing to use any of the cooldowns they have for Prideful. With this week, with Grievous, is going to be even worse. If you're starting to do anything higher than a 15 and none of your DPSers are willing on using cooldowns and it's Grievous, you're gonna have a bad time as a healer. Be prepared to having to use multiple cooldowns to save everyone during the Prideful spawn. Even worse, if they are one of those types of DPS, the ones that stay in Africa. So you're a shaman and your chain heal won't reach them, your Spirit Link totem won't reach them, your healing rain won't reach them, your Earthen Wall totem won't reach them. Yeah, it's gonna be pretty tough. You're actually better off as a healer saying this out loud before the key even starts. Please, at least one of you DPS, use your cooldowns for Prideful, and please stack together if you are a class, if you're a spec that requires you to be stacked to be more efficient and more effective. As for the dungeons themselves, well, one thing you can look at the difficulty for dungeons for this week is how many dungeons are going to do AoE. Because one bad thing this week is that damage taken is going to give you Grievous, which means the more dungeons, the more mobs in the dungeons are going to just shower you in AoE damage. Undodgeable, unavoidable AoE damage means Grievous stacks. We have some very good and apt examples of this. Theater of Pain, lo and behold. Theater of Pain is a pretty good example of this being bad because they do have quite a few enemies that are going to do just this. For example, the mini-bosses. The mini-bosses are going to do their shouts, their screams, their wee, which are going to drop you pretty much to 60 to 70% of your HP every 30 or so seconds, which means a bunch of Grievous stacks that need to be removed. And then you have the Rancid Gas Bag, the big fat guy before the corridor to Gore Chop. Constant AoE around it. And then you have Zav the Unfallen. His lift mechanic back to the center is also gonna chomp you down pretty low in HP and with Grievous. Luckily, this week is fortified, so he's not gonna be as bad as the Rancid Gas Bag and as the mini-bosses, but it is still pretty nasty. And then, of course, you have the big Elemental with Soulstorm, more undodgeable, unavoidable AoE damage, which is going to drop you deep into Grievous. You have the Crossbowmen. You have the Crossbow Skeleton Men pack with 2 of them throwing arrows that chunk DPSers to like 50% HP every time, which is gonna drop you deep into Grievous. So it's just a really bad combination of several pools of very easy application of Grievous to your entire party. which you can't really dodge, you can't really be skillful and avoid and things like that. You're just gonna have to take it like a man. And then you have Sanguine Depths. Well, to be fair, it's not surprising that Sanguine Depths and Theater of Pain are the harder ones. They have been for a few weeks, ever since Necrotic Quake has been turned into a happy little puppy, mostly harmless. Theater of Pain has taken its place at the bottom, and Theater of Pain has been matched by Sanguine Depths, which has been down here for basically the entirety of the expansion. Sanguine Depths also has several trash packs, but more importantly bosses who do exactly this. Crixus, with his lovely Severing Smash, as well as of course the Orb Soaking, is going to put you very often in Grievous territory, several stacks of Grievous territory. You have Executor Tarvold when he's gonna spawn his ad during the Channel of Castigate and the Pulsing AoE. That's gonna be more Grievous. And then you have the lovely Berilla, which does the exact same thing. Very heavy hit on all the party, which is gonna put you into Grievous, plus the dot left behind. That's gonna be a pretty spooky moment. Luckily, you're getting Grievous in a fortified week, so these are all bosses. They're not gonna be as threatening as if it was Tyrannical. So this is kind of sort of your saving grace if you're doing Sanguine Depths. Mists of Tirnaseed and Halls of Atonement honestly do have some similar situations in which Grievous can be pretty bad. Luckily, the dungeon is easy enough by itself, which sort of, you know, lessens the pain. You know, in Mists, you have Ingramalok and Mistcaller, so the first two bosses, which kind of do pulsing AoE to drop your party pretty low. Right? Mistcaller, of course, when she goes untargetable and you have to do the images part, that's gonna be plenty of AoE coming in, which means Grievous. The second part of the trash, after Mistcaller, there's gonna be quite a few players being targeted with the Acid Spit, bringing them low, generating Grievous stacks, plus the melee and the tank together are also going to be brought low more often than not. The first part of the trash is not going to be as bad when it comes to Grievous, as well as Spiteful, actually. So Mist is still going to remain pretty manageable. Halls of Atonement is similar. Of course, you have the Shard of Alkias, which trash. This is an even more important week to make sure as many of your party members outranging the trash. You know, if you have 2 range DPS and a healer, you should always make sure that you are outranging the trash. You can deal with just 1 melee and 1 tank being inside of trash, particularly if the melee uses one of his defensive cooldowns while he's in trash. Outside of these, you know, pretty dangerous points, Grievous remains pretty okay. You do have the last trash pack before the last boss, which can become also pretty dangerous during Grievous because of all the little guys, all the little blobs fixating on multiple players, chunking them low, leaving Grievous behind. You're kind of saved that the dungeon as a whole is pretty manageable. Halls of Atonement. You have Plaguefall, which is sort of in the middle, not really too hard, but also not easy either. So there is some funny scenes this week because of Spiteful in Plaguefall, as you have seen, I'm sure, the weeks before. The Gushing Slimes, where you can technically pull all like 30 of them, and even the Plaguebound Devoted in this Stradama room, they all do on Death's Effect, which means you can spawn like 30 Spiteful at the same time. Beyond those 2 places, Spiteful is not really a problem in Plaguefall. Grievous, though, can be kind of an issue, again, in the places where you get to have undodgeable, unavoidable AoE. So Domina, Venomblade, and Margrave Stradama as bosses do exactly that. You have Globgrog, the first boss, which does do AoE, but not that problematic, not that heavy in damage. You can top off people pretty quickly after the stomp to nullify the Grievous. And then you have the second boss, which is very nice on Grievous because it doesn't really do that much AoE, provided you're not getting hit yourself, since his jumps, his leaps are avoidable. So outside of the bosses, which were the problems of... outside of the bosses, which have been the tough point of Plaguefall ever since they nerfed the trash, and at this point we're talking about months ago, like 2 months ago, over 2 months ago, it doesn't make it as difficult. Similar thing can be said for Spires of Ascension. Spires of Ascension, unlike Plaguefall though, which is why it makes it a little bit more threatening, is it is a fortified focused dungeon. It is not a dungeon very heavy on bosses, on boss difficulty, but more so on trash. One of the heavier difficult parts of Spires of Ascension is going to be the last 3 mini bosses before the actual last boss Devos, particularly because 2 of them outside of the spear guy are going to basically make you take more damage. One is going to give you the debuff, which makes you take more damage, and the other one is going to pulsate AoE, which means that by the time you kill the last one, whichever order you are doing them in, you're gonna have to deal with the damage vulnerability debuff plus the pulsating AoE plus this week Grievous, which makes it arguably harder to heal than the last boss. The other pretty nasty part is going to be Ventunax, but luckily Ventunax has been put in a place in the dungeon where you can always, luckily and reliably, fight him with Prideful and with Bloodlust. And this week being fortified means that, all things considered, a fortified week with Prideful and Bloodlust, the boss should die very quickly to not make it as big of a problem that he can actually be on tyrannical weeks. Obviously, he has the problem of his Dark Stride, which leaves behind the dot, which basically is going to leave the player with the dot in perma Grievous mode, because you can't just stop him once. He's going to keep taking that damage for 15 seconds, and then you have the problem of the orbs. Yes, it's fortified week, so they're not going to one-shot you until you're doing like a plus 19, but even if you get hit once, you're going to go to like 20% HP or 30% HP, and you're going to start getting deep into Grievous. So Ventunax doesn't really have full-blown AoE, but he does have very single-target heavy hitting abilities, which can punish you a lot during Grievous. The rest of the trash is not too dangerous. The rest of the trash, while still being dangerous for other reasons, it doesn't have much unavoidable AoE. A lot of the AoE, like for example the big Goliath Slam, is interruptible, so you can basically avoid it. So yeah, it can become a problem, but only if you fail at mechanics, which we're not assuming you will. The last dungeon, to point out a few things, is going to be the other side. The other side is more dangerous than usual this week in Mythic Plus, despite not being tyrannical, which is what is kind of dangerous for the other side. It doesn't quite reach Sanguine Depths and Theater of Pain level of difficulty, but it does have quite a few problems. Number one, of course, Enraged Spirit. The big fucking guy is already a problem on its own. You have to use several cooldowns to deal with this guy without Grievous. Now that you have Grievous, it's going to be even worse. So generally speaking, you're going to have to pull two of these guys, one of which can be helped to go through with the Nightfey Urn. The Nightfey Urn is going to basically negate one of his AoE cycle. Unfortunately, at high enough keys, usually at least a 15, most of the time a 16, a 17, even with the Urn, you're only going to stop the first AoE, and then he's going to be low enough, but not quite dead, that is going to pull in the second AoE cycle. And then you have the second Enraged Spirit, which you will have to go through raw, no help of the Urns. So you will have to go through 2 rounds of AoE of this guy with Grievous this time around. So defensive abilities for your party, as well as externals, any help you can have for this guy in Fortified is going to be pretty key. To get through him, you do have a few things that you have to remind yourself. For example, on Muezala, remember that when your party gets split in Shatter Reality, you have to remember that some classes, some specs, the poor guys, can't actually heal themselves. So it is recommended as a healer to top them off before you send them in Shatter Reality, because even if they have just 1 Grievous stack, if they have to stay 30 seconds on their own, they're gonna get to 4 Grievous stacks and basically die. Unless they have a healing potion available, maybe they are a hunter with exhilaration, they can heal themselves somehow. But if they can't, you really need to make sure as a healer that you can top them off. As for the most part, luckily, most of the trash in the other side doesn't do unavoidable AoE, which means you're not going to get plenty of Grievous stacks left and right. Because of this, there is of course the Nightmare pool of the 3 slimes before the Mechagon boss, the Mana Storm fight. That's something that's going to be pretty nasty, because you're going to have to go through those into Prideful. So there's going to be a lot of mana spent and possibly cooldowns required for the slimes into a Prideful. And remember, the DPSers are greedy fucks who don't want to use cooldowns, so it's going to make it even worse for your healer. That's going to be a pretty important window to get through safely and not fuck it up. Not to mention, the Mana Storm fight itself has quite a few windows in which AoE damage can happen very often, although that is, again, if you fuck up mechanics. If you don't soak the Power Overwhelming and you let it go to Millhouse, if you don't properly stun the AoE with the Shadow Flame stun yourself, that's also going to be more AoE going down on the party. But again, we are still assuming you are good players and you're not going to let that happen. So it should be a rather calm fight if you're doing the mechanics correctly, since it's not a tyrannical week. And this is mostly it. Most of the dungeons we have gone over. The only skipped one was Necrotic Wake, because, I don't know. At this point, I have a soft spot. I don't even feel like being too mean to it in the current state that Blizzard put this dungeon in. Some people say, some people say it's deserved. Some people say they have suffered enough in Necrotic Wake at the start of the expansion for enough weeks that the state it's in right now, it's deserved. I don't know. I'm a softie. I kind of feel bad for Necrotic Wake. But this was all for today and for the start of this weekend. Not much of anything else has happened, important anyways. So go do your dungeons. Please try to not fuck your healers up too much, especially their poor mana bar this week. So this is where I will leave you. See you guys somewhat reliably soon. In the meantime, someone needs to tell balanced druids that they can actually heal, you know.